Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, August 27th. We are 3 days out from week one getting fully underway, and we got a lot of games to pick. I believe we're going to pick about 13 games on today's show. We have so many different games that I think are very interesting, and obviously we're going to start with those big games. Ohio State, Texas, LSU, Clemson, Notre Dame, Miami. We'll get those out in the first segment. Want to make sure we give those the proper amount of love. Then we'll get to a little bit of a speed run, just a little bit. We'll get to a whip around. We'll get to Syracuse, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida State, Utah, UCLA, a ton of other really fun games. Bill Belichick's debut over there in North Carolina. A lot of different ones in that second segment. Then we got Thursday and Friday Night Lights. A number of really good games starting tomorrow. Boise State, South Florida. We will get to Auburn, Baylor, Georgia Tech, Colorado. All the great games going on before we get to Saturday. And then we'll finish off with some superlatives. Just some things I want to talk about. A couple other games that I want to make sure that we talk about before we get into this weekend, because there's too many to talk about in that short amount of time, but wanted to give some love there at the end to maybe some games that are a little bit underloved going into this weekend. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. We got three huge games this upcoming weekend, three top 10 matchups, and the first one's just incredible. It is Texas at Ohio State. It is a rematch of the Cotton Bowl a year ago, and these are two of the very best teams in the country, the number 1 and 2 team when you look at the coaches poll going into this season. Ohio State is favored by 2.5 points going into this one. Over-under right around 47.5. This one's kicking off at noon, so you got no time to get ready for this one. You got to make sure you're up early, ready to roll. I assume everyone's going to be watching College Game Day for Lee Corso's last show, so this one's going to come right after that, obviously over on Fox. There are a ton of different things going into this matchup. Obviously, Arch Manning and Julian Sayin will be getting the headlines, but as I counted it, I think there's 4 different players on the field in this game that are the best player at their certain position. I believe Colin Simmons is the best edge rusher in the country. I believe Anthony Hill is the best linebacker in the country for Texas. I believe Caleb Downs is the best safety in the country, and Jeremiah Smith, of course, is the best wide receiver in the country. I think we have unique amounts of talent on this field. I also think we have a unique amount of people that are stepping into bigger roles, and it's going to be a little bit all over the place. I can almost promise you in this game, we are going to get a mistake from Julian Sayin. We are going to get a mistake from Arch Manning. We're going to get a little bit of craziness in the first half of this game. I can almost promise you that. And we're going to have two defenses that are just really, really tough to defend, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But some stats to know about this game. Texas is 11-0 in their last 11 true road games. Obviously does not include that game in Dallas, but went on the road to Alabama, got a huge win. Went on the road to Michigan a year ago, got a massive win there. And really under Steve Sarkisian, they've been incredible in true road matchups. They show up in those big-time moments, and it's really paid dividends in those Alabama and Michigan games especially. Also, you have quarterbacks who make their first start against the number 1 team in the country. They're 0-18 in the last 20 years. Obviously, a lot of those games are, Alabama against Mercer or Alabama against, a team that is much inferior to them. But there are a couple of big-time matchups there, and the quarterback making his very first career start, not necessarily faring all that well. Now, what I will say is I'm of the opinion that your career doesn't really start as a quarterback until you go on the road to make a start. This will be Arch Manning's first road start. So I do think both these quarterbacks, although one does have more experience than the other, it's kind of splitting hairs at the end of the day, and I think the road environment kind of evens that out just a little bit. The all-time series is tied 2-2. Obviously, Ohio State got the win last year. Texas got a win in Columbus in 2005. I promise you, if Texas wins this game, the comparisons between Vince Young and Arch Manning will happen almost immediately. I can promise you that. The matchup to watch in this game, as I see it, is Julian Sayin against Pete Kwiatkowski, the Texas defensive coordinator. Julian Sayin is a very confident, very good player, and he's very smart. He absolutely will understand this offense. Going into his second year, definitely has gotten a little bit more comfortable. Maybe some different tweaks with Chip Kelly walking out the door, but overall, he is going to be a very good player this year. I fully believe that. I've said I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback at the end of the year. Pete Kwiatkowski can play around with a lot of stuff. The versatility on this Texas defense is the chief selling point, and he has so many different ways that he can get after him, both in coverage schemes as well as pass rushes, and I think it's going to be really tough for Julian Sayin to handle. Obviously, if he can just get the ball out of his hands quickly to his pass catchers, which I have to assume is the game plan in this one, then he's going to have success. But I can almost promise you Kwiatkowski is going to throw really, really tough things at him, and Julian Sayin is going to have to answer really, really incredibly well, or Texas defense is going to eat him alive, and this one's going to get a little bit ugly for Ohio State's offense. The keys to the game as I see it, I think the biggest thing is the early run game. Whichever team can really get the ball, run the ball very effectively in this game is likely going to win. When you're starting two young quarterbacks, when you're playing a team on the other side that is so talented on the outsides the way both these teams are, whoever can find the advantage in the run game is likely going to win that. That's what happened last year with Quinshon Judkins being maybe the single most important player in this game. James Peoples is likely going to take over that kind of running back one role, and then you have C.J. Donaldson coming off the bench. For Texas, it's Trey Wisner and C.J. Baxter. Both these teams are plenty capable of running the ball very effectively, but whichever team can force one more guy to have to step into the box and play the run is going to hit the first big play, and frankly, I think that's going to be the big play in this game with two defenses that I think are going to play lights out. It might just come down to one of those big-time chunk plays, and the way you make that happen is to run the ball early in this game. And then offensive tackle play, I think, is really interesting in this game because you have two edge defenders on both sides of the ball that are nightmares, and they're a little bit different. Colin Simmons is a little bit more of that, bendy, fast, off the ball, incredibly good pass rusher, plenty good against the run, no doubt about it. You have Ethan Burke on the other side, can do a little bit of everything. Trey Moore is going to factor into that conversation as well. And then on the other side, you have Kenyatta Jackson, you have Caden Curry, you have Bo Atkinson, all incredibly physical, incredibly large, really good edge setters that play incredibly well against the run. Whichever one of these teams can find a way to get their relatively new tackles going. The right tackle for Texas, Brandon Baker, is making his first career start. The left tackle, Austin Saraveld for Ohio State, is making his first career start at tackle. So it's going to be a very big difference. Who can make that? Who can set that edge more effectively? Who can keep their quarterback upright is going to change this game, and I think offensive tackles is going to be a huge piece of this. Then you got quarterbacks. It's just whoever keeps a steady heart rate. It's whoever keeps their team in front of the chains, doesn't try to force the ball. I tend to believe that Arch Manning is going to be a guy that wants to make the big play. That's been very obvious through the early parts of his career, and I think he's going to try to do that in this game. It's probably going to lead to a mistake or two if he can keep his head about him and not let that one mistake become two, become three. He's going to play good football. Same thing with Julian Sayin. He's got to be able to go through his progressions, not freak out when Colin Simmons is bursting off the edge and trying to make a play, or Anthony Hill is coming up the A-gap and has every ability to sack you. You got to keep your head about you. You have to make sure that you're steady-headed, and when you make that mistake, because I can almost promise you both these quarterbacks will do it, who's able to bounce back better? That is the big-time question in this one, and frankly, I've gone back and forth every which way in this game. I frankly think it could be a blowout to Texas' direction all the way to a blowout in Ohio State's direction. I think everything is on the table for this game. I'm going to pick the team that I have a little bit more confidence in the play callers, a little bit more confidence in the quarterback, a little bit more confidence in the offensive line and the pass rush. I'm going to take Texas. I think it is margins. It is absolute margins in this game. I think Texas does an incredible job on the road keeping their wits about them. I think Arch Manning being in his third year in the Texas offense is a huge deal for this game. And I think the Ohio State offensive line will be very good down the road. I think this first game is going to be really tough to handle those edge rushers for Texas. I think Julian Sayin makes a couple of mistakes, and I'll take Texas to win this one 24-20. I think it could go any which way, and I think this Ohio State team could send an absolute message if they went out there and got the win, but I'll take Texas for the time being, and we'll move on forward to the game that is going to happen Saturday night, LSU at Clemson, the battle for the real Tigers, the battle for the real Death Valley, whatever you want to call it. It is going to be a huge game over there in Clemson, and the quarterback matchup of the millennium. We'll talk about it more later in the show, but this is an incredible one. Garrett Nussmeier against Cade Klubnik, my two top quarterbacks in the country, if you were to ask me, going at it, going to be an incredible matchup, and some stats to watch in this one. LSU has lost 5 straight season openers, very well documented. They lost to USC last year, Florida State 2 times before that, UCLA and Mississippi State. they got to figure it out. There's no doubt about that. They very much have to start quickly. If they don't, these fans are going to get a little bit restless, a little bit faster than Brian Kelly wants. Clemson has lost 4 straight SEC games, 7 of the last 10 against SEC teams. Obviously, those 3 losses last year to Georgia, South Carolina, and then Texas in the CFP kind of did them in at the end of the year. This is a difference for Clemson. At the end of the day, this is a very talented team that is far and away the best team in the ACC. Do they match up to this SEC size, SEC talent, SEC speed? Is a big time question. And LSU does lead the all-time series 3-1. As you can imagine, the most recent was that 2020 championship game with Joe Burrow just doing ridiculous things, that Clemson defense. The matchup to watch, in my opinion, is the LSU secondary against the Clemson wide receivers. I don't know if it's really up for debate, frankly. This is a very, very good group of wide receivers on one side for Clemson. You obviously have Antonio Williams in the slot, Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore going into their sophomore years on the outside. You bring in Mansour Deline on the back end for LSU, as well as a couple of Jakeem Jackson from Florida, a number of very, very talented players. LSU has to play the role. They have to be able to at least keep a cap on this offense, not let them make those big plays over the middle of the field. And one of the bigger matchups in this entire game from player to player is, what does Harold Perkins do in the nickel role against Antonio Williams? Does he match up there very much? Do they try to give him, not in coverage as much? Because frankly, as I see it right now, that is a massive mismatch towards Clemson's direction. Is that going to be a big-time piece in this game, or is everyone going to just handle their business and Harold Perkins comes out as maybe the player of the game with the way he covered? But this is a huge matchup. This is one that Clemson's receivers could very well take over this game, and Clemson's walking into a 20-point win, or the LSU secondary perks up, plays some incredible football, really sets the record straight on what they're going to be this year, and LSU walks out with a massive win and looking like that defense might actually be a strength of this team going forward. The keys to the game are very clear to me. I think LSU's offensive line play has to be incredible. When you have TJ Parker, Peter Woods, among probably 3 or 4 other NFL bodies on that defensive line for Clemson, you got to be right. And there's a lot of new players for that team. I think they are all talented players. I think they will come together throughout the year. How quickly does that happen? I love Josh Thompson coming over from Northwestern. I think Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech is going to be a great player on the interior. Can they put it together against a D-line this quickly and this good on the other side is going to be a huge question. This is something that they really struggled with last year, both in pass protection and especially in run blocking down the stretch of the season. They got to get better there. And if they can't run the ball, and that's actually the second key to this game, is taking pressure off these quarterbacks. Both these quarterbacks can put on 300-yard performances and lead their team to a victory. There's no doubt about that. They shouldn't have to. If either of these teams want to have long-term success in this year, they have to find a run game at some point. Adam Randall, Gideon Davidson on one side for Clemson, Caden Durham, Harlem Berry on one side for LSU. Whichever team can run the ball more effectively, frankly, if you told me which team had more rushing, let's say yards per attempt in this game, I'd pick that team to win in a heartbeat. There's no question about that. I do think this is the difference in the game, and not only in this game, but really for the season. For these two teams, they have to find a way to run the ball consistently, and if they don't, you're putting way too much on these quarterbacks' shoulders, and although they're incredible, although they have those performances in them, they probably don't have it every single week, and they probably don't have it against the quality of talent you have on the other side of the field. And then the really interesting one to me is something we talked about just a little bit earlier is slot wide receiver. I think that is going to be a huge battle in this game because, frankly, you might have the two very best in the entire country in this game. Aaron Anderson on one side for LSU, obviously Antonio Williams on the other side for Clemson. These are two elite players, and I think you have matchup problems on both sides of the ball, with Clemson obviously being a little bit more adept to guard it, LSU with maybe Harold Perkins guarding it, maybe a new corner coming in to play that role, and Harold Perkins being more of a roving type player. We don't really know what that looks like, and that's kind of the biggest question around LSU right now is how do you utilize number 7, and how does he kind of get loose in this defense the way that he is capable of, but you still have to put him in the right position, and you don't really know where his position is. At least as of right now, we will find that out. But frankly, I think one of these guys is going to open this thing up. If you told me Aaron Anderson had more yards than Antonio Williams, I'd probably pick LSU in this game. But frankly, I'm going to go Clemson. I think when I look at this game objectively, I don't see an LSU offensive line getting there quick enough to handle TJ Parker, to handle Peter Woods, to handle all of the guys, Sammy Brown, that's going to be playing a factor in all types of game or types of plays in this game. I think Clemson has too much offensively. I think LSU will make plays, both offensively and look relatively solid defensively. Not perfect, but at least a lot better than a year ago. But I'm not going to pick against Clemson at home, especially when Kate Klubnik is running the ship. Then we got Notre Dame at Miami on Sunday night, and this one's going to be incredible. This is a game that I feel like a lot of people have kind of just written off and said, well, Notre Dame's going to roll in it. We talked about it on Monday. Miami has all the ability to win this game. They were able to beat them last time they were down there pretty handily against Notre Dame, but there's a lot of different things going into this game. Obviously, Carson Beck comes over from Georgia going into Miami. CJ Carr takes over as the starting quarterback for Notre Dame, and you have a running duo at Notre Dame that is as special as you will find in the country. Jeremiah Love as well as Jadarian Price are going to be nightmares to deal with for Miami, but if you can slow those guys down and put the game in CJ Carr's hands, then you got a lot of things going in the right direction. And maybe this Miami back end that we talked about on Monday seems to be looking the part early. Maybe they can make a couple of plays and totally turn this thing on its head. Stats to know going into this one. Notre Dame holds a 55% win percentage against top 10 teams, very much in the top 10, I believe, all time in college football. Has done an incredible job in these big time games. Even Marcus Freeman, when he came in, has done a very, very nice job. Obviously lost that big time game to Ohio State, but last year did an incredible job, winning a couple of games before again, losing to Ohio State in the national championship. But Miami hasn't beat a top 10 team under Mario Cristobal. So this would be new territory for Miami when they face off against the Clemsons of the world, when they get a team out of conference that is an elite team. Doesn't quite go the way of the Hurricanes, at least as of late. This would be a huge turning point for this program for obvious reasons, and Notre Dame leads the all-time series 18-8-1. The most recent one was in 2017. Miami did get that win, so Miami on a one-game win streak, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame leads the all-time series, and it's going to be a very, very fun one down there in Coral Gables. The matchup to watch, in my opinion, is the Miami wide receivers against the Notre Dame cornerbacks. Excuse me. Got a little bit ahead of myself there. But Notre Dame loves to play straight-up man coverage. That's the way that they go about business. Now, it is no longer Al Golden. It is now Chris Ash, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So maybe that changes up a little bit. But if you know anything about Carson Beck, or if you look into Carson Beck just a little bit further, he's incredible against zone coverage. He does such a good job going from 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through his progressions, finding the open guy, finding the gap in the defense, and delivering the ball effectively. If you play tight man coverage against Carson Beck, if you have the ability to make him throw into tight windows, to make him throw into man coverage type schemes, he has some issues. He definitely does struggle a little bit more in man coverage, especially when it's uniquely sticky man coverage. And when I look at the Miami wide receivers, I think JoJo Trader is a very good player. I like what CJ Daniels can bring to this team. I think they have the guys to make it work. I got to see it first. I got to see these guys, put it together, especially against Leonard Moore and against Jordan Clark and against Christian Gray. You have too many guys on the other side of that defense that these wide receivers have to be very, very good on Saturday. They have to be able to create separation, give Carson Beck plenty of space to throw the ball into. He will make those throws. If you give him the space to make them, it is going to be a very, very tall order against these DBs. But at the end of the day, this is probably the matchup of the day. Whoever wins this one's probably winning this game. The keys to the game, the first one obviously is get CJ Carr comfortable. Frankly, kind of the same applies for Miami, but we'll talk about that here in a second. CJ Carr, you have to make sure that he feels at least relatively comfortable. It's not going to be perfect. It's his very first start on the road at Miami. The fans are going to be getting after him. It's going to be intense, and it's going to be hard for him to play totally clean football, but get him a couple of easy completions early on. Let him get the ball to Jeremiah Love and let Jeremiah Love go for 25 yards and make CJ Carr look really good. Allow this kid to do what he does very well, which is just distribute the ball, get the ball to the playmakers. I love the wide receiver core that they have, weirdly enough, for Notre Dame this upcoming year. Love Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison. You bring in Malachi Fields from Virginia. I think they have the dudes. This guy just has to steer the ship, and the only way he can do that is if they get the run game going. If they give him some easy completions to where he's not having to push the ball downfield into very, very tight windows. For Miami, it's kind of the same principle, but mainly you got to get the run game going. If Miami is going to be able to win this game, they have to be able to get Notre Dame to kind of commit more bodies to the box and allow Carson Beck to have those openings in the back end because he will hit them. I love Jordan Lyle. I think he's a very, very good player that's going to explode onto the scene this year. Mark Fletcher, a little bit more of that bruiser, probably will be relatively the running back one, but I think the carries will be relatively evenly split. I like the group that they have. If they can't run the football against this Notre Dame front, it's going to be a problem. And Miami has one of the best offensive lines in the country as far as I'm concerned, so I expect them to be relatively solid there. If they can't do that and they can just sit back in coverage and allow Carson Beck to throw into precarious windows, it's going to get bad in a hurry for this Miami offense. And then new defensive coordinators on both sides of the ball. Chris Ash on the Notre Dame side takes over for Al Golden, who moved on to the Bengals, and then Corey Heatherman. I forgot that name on Monday, but Corey Heatherman takes over at Miami, coming over from Minnesota. How much changes, especially for Miami, frankly, how much changes and how good they are for Notre Dame. Just what is the identity of this defense? Does Chris Ash play it a lot like Al Golden did? Very aggressive, playing man coverage on the back end, trusting your DBs and letting your guys get after it? Or is he a little bit more reserved against these guys? Play a little bit more cover 3 shell and cover 2 shell and make things a little bit easier on your front end. We'll see what happens. It's definitely a really interesting thing. I think Miami has to take big time steps forward even in this first game to make sure that they can do what they want to do this year. And for Notre Dame, I think it's a game that if you lose it, you're staring down one against A&M that could very well knock you out of the playoff in week 3 of the season. But I'm going to take Notre Dame. I think when I look at this game, there are so many different ways that I could see Miami putting together a very good performance and winning this one. At the end of it all, I see Jeremiah Love going 80 yards for a touchdown. I see Jadarian Price going 40 yards for a big-time gain to put this game away. I think Notre Dame has enough players. I think the defense is just far, far too good. I think Carson Beck will be forced into just a couple of precarious throws, not necessarily terrible, terrible decisions, but maybe Leonard Moore is just a little bit too close on JoJo Trader, and he pulls the trigger and it gets picked off and ran the other direction. I think Notre Dame has the dudes. I think they will open quickly, and I think Miami will just not quite have the continuity, the connectiveness to come together and come back from an early deficit against Notre Dame. So that's where I stand. I'm going to take Texas, I'm going to take Clemson, and I'm going to take Notre Dame in these big-time games this upcoming weekend, and I feel about as good about it as just about everyone else does. Okay, at the very least. These games are going to be incredible. They're going to be up all over the place, and obviously that Ohio State-Texas game kind of takes the cake, and we'll talk about more of that one later, but let's take our first break, and when we come back, we got a ton of games for you. We got 5 different games going on Saturday and Sunday: Syracuse, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida State, Utah, UCLA, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, and then TCU, North Carolina, Bill Belichick's debut. We'll break them all down right after this, so stick with us.